All right, so let's talk about the Kyle Rittenhouse trial and what's going on there. We are still waiting for a jury verdict. Rumor is, according to Jack Posobiec and a U.S. Marshal in Kenosha, there are two jurors holding up, two of the 12, holding up the proceedings because they are afraid for their lives, their jobs, their children. If that's not jury intimidation, I don't know what is, especially when you compare that to, even though you know they're not supposed to look at anything outside of the trial. During the trial, we do get who is supposedly George Floyd's nephew posting his video saying, "Oh, we got cameras in the courtroom. We know who the jurors are. We're coming after you." And we know for a fact, because the judge said it, that someone filmed the jurors getting onto a bus to go to the courthouse, and they just asked the person to delete the video. As if that means the video is gone. No real way to know what actually happened there, but is what it is. As it stands, they seem to be going through the process now of trying to figure out if they can actually, if the defense is trying to figure out if they can actually get it declared a mistrial with prejudice. And if they can get it declared a mistrial with prejudice, do it. That has to happen, from my understanding, before the jury sends in a verdict. After the jury gives their verdict, the judge could still declare a mistrial, but it would be without prejudice, which would mean double jeopardy no longer applies because constitutional rights don't fucking matter, and the state can retry Kyle Rittenhouse over this same stuff. Just, you know, with a judge of their choosing and a jury of their choosing. So if it can be dismissed without or with prejudice, that would be very good for everyone in America. And what I mean by that is that this trial, yes, Kyle is the one who's been on the stand. Kyle is the one that's on trial right now. But it is not about him at all. It hasn't been since the day this happened. It's about every American that ever wants to carry a gun to defend themselves. And it doesn't really matter what side of the political spectrum you're on, or what race you are, or what religion you are, or whatever you are. Built into our Constitution is a right to carry a gun, which comes implicit with a right to defend yourself. They've been trying to enact gun laws for a long time, and they don't really work. And according to always untrustworthy, I would say, polls, more people are supporting, less people are supporting gun control laws than it has been the case in a long time. I almost wanted to say more people are supporting free gun laws than in a long time. And maybe that's the case too. That's what this trial really comes down to, is gun control. They know they can't get that passed. So how do you circumvent gun control laws? Well, you make guns useless in the face of the law. Depending on how the Kyle Rittenhouse trial goes, what the verdict is, what the judge decides to do, if he is found guilty, which I hope is not the case, but if he is found guilty, there's a couple layers to this, but the top one is that we as Americans will no longer have a right to defend ourselves. It doesn't matter if you have a firearm. You can't use it to defend yourself. Gun control laws no longer matter, because even if you have a gun, if you're allowed to have a gun by law, you're not going to be allowed to have one and use it to defend yourself. And it doesn't matter what the situation is, you can't use it to defend yourself. Unless you're being shot, you cannot shoot back. It was actually pretty fucking reminiscent of, was it Petraeus that put in the, yeah, I think it was Petraeus that put in, gave out the orders to our troops in Afghanistan and Iraq that rules of engagement are, it doesn't matter if they have a gun, it doesn't matter if they're a military age male, they have to be shooting at you before you can shoot back. I think that was him. That's pretty much what our law is, our government is trying to put on us now in America, is that they have to have a gun and be shooting at you. If they don't shoot you, you can't even shoot back. Now, if any of them had a blade, maybe that would just be probably just become an excuse for them to take knives away from us. Either way, they're going to spin it. I believe Mythbusters did a couple trial runs, and a person with a knife versus a person with a holstered gun. As long as the person with a knife is within 27 feet, they win every time. 27 feet. You understand that? Like, you ever been on a football field? That's 9 yards. If they're 9 yards away from you and you have a gun in a holster and they have a knife, they win every time. Fucking blows my mind that this kid is even on trial. But he is. And like I said, it's not even about him. It's all of us. Because if he isn't found not guilty on all counts, if this court case isn't declared a mistrial with prejudice, yeah, Kyle's going to go to jail for the rest of his life, but none of us are going to have a right to defend ourselves anymore. All right, well, besides all that, let's talk about what's going on in the trial right now. They're trying to get a mistrial declared. Kyle's defense team is, with prejudice, which would mean that he cannot be tried again for anything related to this incident. They're trying to do this on the basis, compared to what it could be, a flimsy basis, that the prosecution gave them an altered, because it was shortened and shittier quality, altered version of a video that they then played for the jury during their closing argument, which is pretty messed up. It is nowhere near the most egregious thing that the prosecution has done during the course of this trial. All right, to start with, that whole video, the centerpiece of that video, was supposed to be that Kyle Rittenhouse is pointing his gun at the Zeminski couple. The prosecution could waive their Fifth Amendment right and compel them to testify in this trial. They did not do that. Wonder why they didn't do that? Because these are the people that Kyle supposedly pointed a gun at, and if they went on the stand and were cross-examined with making them and the jury look at the photos and the videos, it didn't happen. So if they went on the stand, it would end up being that they ended up saying, because they're under oath and they could be charged if they lie, which most of the state's witnesses should be charged for perjury after this trial. I'm actually going to say go ahead and waiver those and charge the prosecutor, the assistant DA that was prosecuting this case, because most of them lied thanks to him and due to his prodding and his efforts. But the Zeminskis, if they went on the stand, it would blow up the state's whole case. That's why they didn't want them there. That's why they didn't subpoena them. And that brings us to Grosskreutz, the bicep blown off guy, the last guy that Kyle shot, the one that pretended to surrender, and Kyle lowered his rifle and then pointed his gun at Kyle's head, and Kyle shot him. All that was confirmed when he was under oath during the trial. And then this motherfucker goes on Good Morning Show on CNN, and props to Anderson Cooper for being like, hey, you said during the trial, here's a video of it, that he didn't shoot you until you pointed a gun at his head. But on Good Morning America, of course, Michael Strahan was just like, well, you're here now. You're safe. This is a safe space. You can say whatever you want to say. Bullshit. You can lie now. You can say whatever it is that fits your narrative. Just go ahead and let her rip. Bullshit. Then there's also the fact that the assistant DA or the DA completely erased the pending charges on that same fellow, Grosskreutz, which they could have charged him and never did, for illegally carrying a handgun that night. There's 2 or 3 different laws that he broke with his firearm because it was concealed. He did not have a permit for a concealed weapon. It was a handgun, and pretty sure he had already been convicted of a felony in the past, so he wasn't supposed to have a handgun to begin with. A couple different laws that he broke that night, without even just attacking a random person. Or whatever else he did that night. Anyway, the DA wiped out a DUI charge that was pending for him 6 days before the Kyle Rittenhouse trial started. Because if they didn't let him get away with, I believe it would have been his third DUI, if they didn't let him get away with that, then the defense, Kyle's defensive lawyers would have been allowed to question him about his criminal past in front of the jury. Can't have that, it hurts the case. So the prosecution erases, essentially, the criminal history of their key witness. Their next two key witnesses are both dead. So they couldn't talk about their criminal histories either. Both of them had long criminal rap sheets. One of them for raping children. The other one for about a dozen counts of domestic violence, domestic abuse. I hope it wasn't all the same girl, but at some point, you got to stay away from this dude. Luckily, nobody has to worry about him now. That goes for both of them, really. That Black Lives Matter is upset about this. They're protesting this whole thing and saying that no justice, no peace. They've been screaming that outside of the courthouse for the last 2 days. Hilarious. The mainstream media has sold this narrative the entire time that Kyle Rittenhouse took a gun over state lines that he wasn't allowed to have, and he's a white supremacist that shot 3 black people. Well, his dad lived there. His grandma lived there. He worked there. It's where he was born. It was 30 minutes, yes, a different state, but 30 minutes from where he lived at the time. And he didn't take a gun over there. He got a gun from his buddy that had bought the gun with the verbal deal that, yes, buying the gun for Kyle Rittenhouse, as soon as Kyle Rittenhouse turns 18, he would sell the gun to Kyle Rittenhouse in a $1 deal, make it officially his. That guy, of course, is facing multiple charges from the state, from the assistant district attorney, the state prosecutor, and who goes on the stand and says, yeah, he stole the gun. He definitely stole the gun from me. Despite all of the other evidence that says Dominic Black actually invited Kyle Rittenhouse to his house because he frickin' drove him there, gave him the gun that halfway belonged to Kyle, and then drove the both of them to downtown Kenosha. But he gets on the stand and lies. Why? Because the prosecution has been threatening him with harsher charges if he doesn't lie to help them in their case against Kyle Rittenhouse. And he's not the only witness that's been intimidated, or he's the most glaring example of that. But there's also, I forget his name, but the guy that It might have been one of the male Zeminski. Maybe. Or it was a cameraman or something. Anyway, this guy goes on the stand and gives his testimony, and the prosecutor is like, but you told us something different. And the guy says, well, I said what I told the police. You wanted me to say something different, and you tried to get me to say something different, and I refused. So started talking about the racial element of this earlier, and I don't think I completed that thought. White kid. Never committed a crime. Shoots 3 other white people. Mainstream media and Black Lives Matter and all the clueless people out there that have not paid attention to any of this at all would have you believe that Kyle Rittenhouse was a white supremacist, active shooter, mass murderer. None of it adds up. None of it makes sense. There has not been a racial element to this until like yesterday, when it turns out the person that Littlefinger has been shaking his head every time he calls him, as the defense calls him, jump kick man. Fucking high and mighty bullshit. Turns out jump kick man is a 40-year-old black man. We only figured that out because he is trying desperately to get out of, I believe would be his 12th domestic abuse charge. He might also have a DUI that he's trying to get out of. He asked the prosecution for immunity. They refused because in exchange for giving testimony in this case, they refused presumably because they don't want to put a black guy in there, especially not a black guy that just attacked Kyle and didn't get shot. It's not going to fit the narrative. So we finally got a racial element, and it's like the complete opposite of the racial narrative. I find that funny. I got a messed up sense of humor. Sorry, not sorry. Yeah. Everybody Kyle shot that night had over a decade's worth of criminal history. Everybody that attacked Kyle that night had over a decade's worth of criminal history. If Kyle had a decade's worth of criminal history, then he would have had to have started when he was 7. Just let that soak in. And I'll tell you what, I, for one, am not at all upset that I will never meet Joseph Rosenbaum or Anthony Huber or Grosskreutz, for that matter. I hope I never meet that fucker. I will tell you one person I am upset that I will never meet. And that is Sincere Gaston. I'll leave it to you to look him up. He was killed in Chicago in June of 2020. And that's not what Black Lives Matter is about. Anyway, now that I've bummed myself out, I'm sure there's a bunch of other misconduct from the prosecution I did not cover. I know there is more misconduct from them that I didn't cover. I don't know that it's also politically charged. I don't know what's going to happen. Maybe we just don't have free trials. Maybe we don't have fair trials anymore. Maybe we just have mob rule. And before long, we're going to figure out if we even have a right, per our government, to defend ourselves. And maybe that's the point that people will realize, that our rights don't come from the government. Just a thought. See you next time.